Not welcome here anymore, I repeated, watching my mother-in-law, Diana, smugly dangle the new cabin keys in front of me. This place belongs to the family now, and you're not family anymore, she declared, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the brass carring. My name is Sophia Winters, and at 32, I was standing on the porch of my grandfather's cabin, the place where I'd spent every summer since I was a child, being told I no longer belonged. The irony wasn't lost on me. Diana had never even met my grandfather, yet here she was, acting like she owned his legacy. The cabin, nestled deep in the Montana wilderness, had been in my family for generations. My grandfather, James Harrison, was a renowned geologist who'd spent decades exploring these mountains. He passed away 6 months ago, leaving the cabin jointly to me and my husband Marcus. But now, with our divorce finalized last week, Diana had wasted no time in asserting her control. "You can't just change the locks," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside. "The cabin is still half mine." Diana laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Oh, sweetheart, Marcus has already filed to have your name removed. After what you did to my son, you're lucky we don't sue you for everything else." What I'd done? I caught Marcus cheating with his secretary. A classic cliche, he'd somehow convinced his mother was my fault. According to Diana, if I'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have strayed. Never mind that I'd supported him through medical school while working 2 jobs. Besides, Diana continued, straightening her expensive blouse, "We need this place. Amanda's wedding photos would look perfect here." Amanda, my former sister-in-law, who'd been equally quick to turn on me after the divorce. I glanced past Diana into the cabin's front window, seeing the familiar interior that held so many secrets. If only she knew what she was really standing on. My grandfather's last words to me echoed in my mind. "The map is yours now, Sophia. Only you know how to read it." The map, his life's work, leading to something far more valuable than a scenic backdrop for wedding photos. I'd spent years helping him document the geological surveys, learning his special markings and codes. What looked like simple survey notes to others was actually a detailed treasure map, pointing to a gold deposit he discovered but never claimed. "Fine," I said, surprising Diana with my calm acceptance, "but I'll need to get my things." "Already packed them," she said, gesturing to a box by the door. "You can take them and go." I picked up the box, hiding my smile. The important things, my grandfather's journals, his old surveys, and most crucially, the map, were safely hidden away. Diana could have the cabin for now. The real prize lay beneath the ground, and only I knew how to find it. As I walked to my car, Diana called out, "Don't come back, Sophia. You're not welcome in this family anymore." I turned back, meeting her gaze. "Enjoy your search," I said cryptically, enjoying the confusion that flickered across her face. Over the next few days, I holed up in my apartment, spreading out my grandfather's papers across the dining room table. The map wasn't a single document, but a collection of survey notes, geological reports, and seemingly random markings in his journals. To anyone else, they looked like the scattered work of a passionate geologist. But I knew better. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Mom said you were causing trouble at the cabin. Stay away or we'll get a restraining order." I ignored it, focusing instead on the papers before me. My grandfather had spent years carefully documenting the location of a significant gold deposit he discovered during his surveys. He kept it secret, knowing the land would be stripped and destroyed if mining companies found out. Instead, he'd bought the cabin and the surrounding land, protecting it while leaving a trail of clues only a trained eye could follow. "The key isn't in the obvious places, Sophia," he told me during our last conversation. "Remember what I taught you about reading the land?" I ran my fingers over his familiar handwriting, tracing the subtle marks he'd made in the margins of his surveys. To Diana and Marcus, the cabin was just a pretty piece of property. They had no idea they were sitting on top of a fortune, or that the only person who could find it was the one they just locked out. A knock at my door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Amanda, looking unusually nervous. "What do you want?" I asked through the door. "Please, Sophia, can we talk? Mom's acting strange, and I think something's going on at the cabin." I opened the door cautiously. Amanda stood there, not quite meeting my eyes. She'd always followed her mother's lead, but something in her expression was different now. "Mom's hired people," she said, stepping inside. "They're doing surveys, digging up parts of the property. She keeps talking about your grandfather's research. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course, Diana would jump to conclusions, probably thinking the cabin itself held some obvious secret. She didn't understand that my grandfather had been smarter than that. The real clues were in the land itself, in the geological formations he carefully documented over decades. Why are you telling me this? I asked Amanda. She shifted uncomfortably. Because, because what they did to you wasn't right. And now Mom's obsessed with finding something. She keeps saying Grandpa Harrison must have left something valuable behind. I study my former sister-in-law, wondering how much to reveal. The cabin holds a lot of memories, I said carefully. Maybe that's what she's looking for. Amanda shook her head. No, it's more than that. She's hired geologists, but they all say the same thing. They can't make sense of your grandfather's notes. She's getting frustrated. Of course they couldn't make sense of the notes. My grandfather had developed his own system of markers and symbols, teaching them only to me during our years of working together. It was our special bond, one that even Marcus had never fully understood. As Amanda left, I turned back to the papers spread across my table. Diana could tear up the cabin grounds all she wanted. Without the key to my grandfather's code, she was quite literally digging in the dark. The real treasure lay elsewhere, in a place only I could find. I picked up my favorite photo of my grandfather and me taken on the cabin's porch years ago. In the background, barely visible, was the rock formation he'd always called nature's compass. That was where the real search would begin, but only when I was ready. For now, I'd let Diana chase her wild theories. Sometimes the best revenge is simply knowing something others don't and watching them scramble to figure it out. 2 weeks after Diana locked me out of the cabin, I received a series of frantic text messages from Amanda. They're destroying everything, she wrote, attaching photos of the cabin grounds torn up by heavy machinery. Mom's gone crazy with the excavation. She's convinced there's gold somewhere on the property. I zoomed in on the photos, my heart sinking at the sight of the once pristine landscape now scared by trenches and holes. The beautiful wildflower meadow where my grandfather and I used to identify plant species was now a muddy pit. But what caught my eye was the untouched rock formation in the background. Nature's compass still stood proud, its secrets safe. My phone rang. It was Marcus. For the first time since our divorce, I answered. What did your grandfather hide here? He demanded, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. Mom spent a fortune on surveys and equipment, and we're finding nothing. Maybe because there's nothing to find, I replied calmly, though I couldn't help but smile at their frustration. Or maybe you're just looking in all the wrong places. Don't play games, Sophia, he snapped. We found his journals in the cabin's basement. All those surveys, the markings, they have to mean something. Just tell us what you know. I thought about the journals they'd found, my grandfather's decoy notebooks, filled with misleading observations and false leads. The real journals were safely in my possession, along with the true map. I know you're smarter than this, Marcus, I said. Did you really think my grandfather would leave his life's work just lying around in a basement? His sharp intake of breath told me I'd struck a nerve. So you do know something. I know that you and your mother are destroying a beautiful piece of land based on wild speculation, I replied. Grandfather would be heartbroken to see what you've done to his property. His property? Marcus laughed bitterly. It's our property now, and we'll do whatever we want with it. Unless what? Help us, Sophia. Tell us what the surveys mean, and we'll cut you in, 20%. I actually laughed out loud. 20% of something you can't find. That's generous. 30 then, he offered quickly. Come on, Sophia. We both know you helped him with his research. You understand his notes better than anyone. Goodbye, Marcus, I said, ending the call. Later that evening, I drove out to the overlook point half a mile from the cabin. From here, I could see the extent of Diana's destruction. Floodlights illuminated the work area where a small excavator sat silent for the night. The scene looked more like a construction site than the peaceful retreat my grandfather had loved. Movement caught my eye. A figure walking the grounds with a flashlight. Through my binoculars, I recognized Diana, still searching even at this late hour. Her obsession was growing, just as I'd expected it would. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. Greed makes people blind, Sophia. They'll tear up the earth looking for gold, never realizing the real treasure is in understanding the land itself. He'd been right. Diana and Marcus were so focused on finding some hidden vault or buried chests, that they couldn't see the bigger picture. The gold deposit wasn't under the cabin at all. It was half a mile away, carefully hidden by the natural rock formations my grandfather had mapped over decades. A text from Amanda broke my reverie. Mom's hired a new geologist. This one says he might be able to decode the symbols in Grandpa's journals. I smiled, typing back, "How many does that make now?" Fourth one this week. They all say the same thing. The markings don't match any standard geological survey notation. Of course they didn't. My grandfather had created his own system, one that combined standard geological markers with Native American symbols he'd learned from his friend Joseph, a local tribal elder. The real map was a beautiful blend of science and traditional knowledge, telling not just where the gold was, but how to reach it without destroying the land. The next morning, I met Joseph at his small house on the reservation. At 82, he was one of the few people who knew the truth about my grandfather's discovery. "They're making quite a mess up there," he said, offering me coffee. "Your grandfather would be troubled to see it." "They won't find anything," I assured him. "The real location is safe." Joseph nodded, his weathered face creasing with a smile. "The land knows its true guardian, Sophia. Your grandfather understood that. These new people, they see only dollar signs. They don't understand the responsibility that comes with such knowledge." He was right. My grandfather hadn't just left me a map to gold. He'd left me a legacy of protecting the land. The gold deposit was significant enough to make us all wealthy, but extracting it would require patience, care, and respect for the environment. Deanna's aggressive excavation proved she wasn't capable of such stewardship. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Amanda. "Mom's talking about selling the cabin. She says if we can't find anything, it's worthless to her." The message should have made me angry, but instead, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Diana's greed was doing exactly what my grandfather had predicted, leading her to destroy her own plans. I drove back to the overlook point, watching as another team of geologists walked the torn-up grounds with their equipment. From my vantage point, I could see nature's compass clearly, the distinctive rock formation that marked the starting point of the real treasure map. My grandfather had chosen it carefully, knowing that its significance would only be apparent to someone who understood both the geology and the traditional stories of the land. The formation looked like a natural feature to most people, but when viewed at the right angle, it pointed to a series of markers that led to the gold deposit. My grandfather had documented each marker in his real journals, using his unique combination of geological notes and indigenous symbols to create a map that could only be followed by someone who shared his respect for the land. As I watched Diana's latest team of experts fumble around with their equipment, I pulled out my grandfather's true journal. The pages were worn with age, filled with his careful observations and detailed drawings. Each symbol told a story, not just about the gold, but about the land itself, its history, its features, and its importance to the local ecosystem. "Patience, Sophia," I could almost hear him say. "Let them chase their shadows. The truth will reveal itself when the time is right." And he was right. Diana's destructive search was actually helping my cause. Soon she would give up, sell the cabin in frustration, and move on to her next scheme. Then, when the dust settled, I could begin the real work, not just finding the gold, but protecting it and the land, just as my grandfather had always intended. 3 months after Diana's destructive search began, it ended exactly as I predicted. The cabin, now surrounded by unfilled trenches and scattered equipment, was put up for sale. Diana had finally admitted defeat, but not before turning my grandfather's peaceful retreat into what looked like an abandoned mining site. I received the news from Amanda, who'd become my unlikely ally throughout this ordeal. "Mom's selling it for half what it's worth," she texted. "She says she never wants to see this worthless piece of land again." Perfect. Through a shell company I'd set up with Joseph's help, I made an offer on the property. Diana, eager to rid herself of what she saw as an embarrassing failure, accepted immediately. She didn't even bother to check who the buyers were, too focused on salvaging what remained of her reputation in the local community. The day I got the keys back, I stood on the cabin's porch, looking out at the damaged landscape. It would take time to heal the scars Diana had left, but nature was resilient. Already, wild grasses were beginning to reclaim the edges of the excavated areas. "Your grandfather would be proud," Joseph said, standing beside me. "You protected his secret just as he knew you would." I nodded, thinking of all the times my grandfather had sat with me on this very porch, teaching me about the land's hidden stories. "It's time," I said quietly. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, I opened my grandfather's true journal to the first page of the map. With Joseph's help, I began the real search, not with heavy machinery and disruption, but with careful observation and respect for the land. Nature's compass, untouched by Diana's destruction, cast a long shadow that aligned perfectly with the first marker my grandfather had documented. From there, we followed his carefully coded instructions, each step revealing another piece of the puzzle. The gold deposit, as I'd known all along, was nowhere near where Diana had searched. It lay protected beneath a series of natural rock formations half a mile away, accessible only through a narrow passage that would prevent large-scale mining operations. My grandfather had chosen this location deliberately, ensuring that the gold could only be extracted slowly and sustainably. 2 weeks later, I invited Amanda to the cabin. She stood in shock as I explained everything: my grandfather's real map, the true location of the gold, and his vision for preserving the land while responsibly managing its resources. "All this time," she whispered, while Mom was tearing up the ground. "The real treasure was hidden in plain sight," I finished, "but it needed the right person to find it." I showed her my plans for the property, a conservation trust that would protect the land while using a portion of the gold's proceeds to fund environmental education and restoration projects. It was exactly what my grandfather had wanted, his discovery benefiting the community while preserving the natural beauty he'd loved so much. "I've been so wrong about everything," Amanda said, tears in her eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" I thought about the past few months, about how she'd slowly changed, choosing to help me instead of blindly following her mother's destructive path. "I already have," I replied. The first gold extraction began quietly, under Joseph's guidance and with full respect for traditional land management practices. The proceeds went exactly where my grandfather had intended, into a trust dedicated to protecting the land and supporting environmental education. Deanna and Marcus eventually heard about the cabin's new owner and the successful gold mining operation. Through the local gossip vine, I learned that Diana had been furious, finally realizing how thoroughly she'd been outplayed. She tried to challenge the sale, of course, but her own eagerness to get rid of the worthless property had left her with no legal recourse. 1 year later, I sat on the restored cabin porch with Joseph, looking out at the healed landscape. The scars of Diana's destruction were almost gone, replaced by native plants and walking trails that local school groups use for nature education. "Your grandfather used to say that the real gold isn't what you find in the ground," Joseph remarked, "but what you learn while looking for it." I smiled, understanding now what my grandfather had known all along. The true treasure wasn't just the gold. It was the knowledge of how to protect it, the wisdom to use it responsibly, and the patience to wait for the right moment to reveal its secrets. The cabin was once again a place of peace and learning, just as my grandfather had intended. And somewhere out there, Diana was still probably searching for gold in all the wrong places, never understanding that true wealth isn't found through destruction and greed, but through patience, respect, and understanding of the land itself. As the sun set behind nature's compass, casting its familiar shadow across the restored meadow, I felt my grandfather's presence stronger than ever. He'd left me more than just a map to gold. He'd left me a legacy of wisdom, patience, and respect for the land. And that, I knew, was the greatest treasure of all.